Since the dawn of human consciousness, our minds have tried to make sense of the world around us. What we perceive as reality isn't always what's truly there. Our view is filtered through something more complex than any camera lens. At this very moment, billions of thoughts shape how each of us experiences the exact same world differently, and our mental well-being hinges on understanding why. Cognitive distortion is fundamental to human experience. When we feel threatened, form relationships, or face the unknown, these mental filters carry real consequences. This investigation follows the hidden pathways of perception in minds that process information faster than ever before. Psychology has only recently begun to reveal how much our mental health depends on recognizing when we're seeing the world not as it is, but as we've been programmed to see it. The human mind is the most deceitful of all things. It is incurable. No one can understand how deceitful it is. In many cultures, the mind is described as something that clouds rather than clarifies. Spiritual teachings across history have compared normal perception to a kind of dream, not because we're asleep, but because we move through life convinced that what we see is the full picture. Thoughts appear and we assume they're accurate. Senses respond to the world and we treat that input as solid truth. But layer by layer, those impressions are shaped by internal processes we rarely examine. Emotion, memory, fear, bias. What seems objective may be deeply subjective. This creates a strange tension. We operate with confidence, but often on top of mental assumptions we've never questioned. The result can feel like reality, but in many cases, it's more like a personal version of it. Most of us have done this without realizing it. A friend cancels plans, and before they even explain, something inside us starts filling in the gaps. We might think they're avoiding us, that they're upset, that we did something wrong. None of that comes from evidence. The same thing can happen at work. A short comment from a boss, and suddenly the mind creates a full storyline about disappointment or rejection. In clinical terms, mind reading is a type of cognitive distortion. It happens when we assume we know what someone else is thinking or feeling, often without any real data. And more often than not, those assumptions lean negative. A person might believe they're being judged, ignored, or disliked, and that's what makes it so convincing. It feels like insight, but it's often just projection. Cognitive distortions often stem from internal fears, not external facts. Instead of seeing others clearly, we project our own insecurities onto them. A person who secretly worries they're inadequate might read discomfort into a neutral glance. The colleague may be tired or distracted, but the assumption becomes personal. Without checking the facts, a false explanation takes hold. Psychologists describe this pattern as projection. It's when a person attributes their own feelings, traits, or fears to someone else. Carl Jung described projection as a process that reshapes how we see the world, making it harder to separate reality from our own internal state. A person starts reacting to their own assumptions rather than what others have actually said or done. Instead of asking what someone meant or why they acted a certain way, we respond based on an internal story. This can lead to tension, misunderstanding, or anxiety. When projection becomes a pattern, it reinforces itself. Assumptions become expectations, and expectations shape our reactions, often without our awareness. You send a friend a message about something important. A few hours go by and there's no response. You start thinking something might be wrong. Maybe she's upset. Later, she tells you her phone died while she was at work. She never saw the message. There was no issue, just a practical reason for the delay. But before you knew the facts, your reaction had already taken shape. This kind of response is common. It's a form of distortion. The mind fills in a story without checking if it's true. In this case, the assumption felt like a reaction to her, but it was really based on fear or insecurity. Learning to pause and ask for clarity, instead of acting on a thought that hasn't been confirmed, can prevent unnecessary stress or conflict. In many situations, people place themselves in one of two roles. Either they're the person who's been wronged or the one who had to step in and make things right. If every disagreement ends with the conclusion that someone else was at fault, that pattern deserves attention. The same applies when someone constantly sees themselves as the only one acting with good intentions. This isn't always deliberate. The brain tends to simplify complex events. It avoids uncertainty by assigning clear roles and outcomes. But when the story always centers on being the victim or the hero, something important gets lost: context. Real life is rarely that one-sided. Mistakes, misunderstandings, and mixed motives are common. A self-serving explanation can feel good in the moment. It protects self-image, but when it becomes automatic, it stops us from looking at how we contribute to problems. It also makes it harder to learn anything from them. Psychologists refer to this as the self-serving bias. It's a mental habit where people take credit for successes but shift blame for failures onto others. It creates a version of reality that feels good but isn't fully accurate. Events are filtered through a story that always puts the self in the best possible light. This kind of internal narrative can feel consistent, but it's often built by avoiding discomfort. Another version of this distortion is often called victim mentality. It describes a pattern where a person sees themselves as powerless in situations where they actually have some influence or responsibility. Psychologists explain this as a belief system that leans toward helplessness, even when options or resources are available. Dr. Josh Gressel defines it as viewing oneself as innocent in conflict without recognizing any role in what happened. The mindset reduces everything to something done to you, rather than something you might be involved in. This kind of thinking doesn't always come from weakness. It can be a way to protect against guilt or discomfort. If a person believes they had no control, they don't have to examine what they could have done differently. It removes the pressure to act, but also removes the ability to change anything. The result is a false sense of relief that slowly becomes limiting. And if the mind keeps repeating the same story that others are always at fault, then that leaves no space for reflection or growth. What feels like protection becomes a barrier to responsibility. The opposite of victim thinking can seem more confident, but it carries its own distortion. This is the hero narrative, the belief that you're the one who holds everything together. It might show up as seeing yourself as the only person at work who gets things done, or as the friend who always supports others but never gets support in return. Psychologists describe this pattern as a form of inflated self-perception. It can act as a defense against insecurity or fear of dependence. If the story is that you're the one who always helps, then asking for help or making a mistake becomes a threat to that image. The pressure to maintain this role can make it harder to recognize when others are contributing or when you've made an error. This kind of thinking limits connection. It places the self above others, and like all distortions, it narrows perception. Instead of seeing a situation with all its moving parts, the mind filters it through a single, self-protective role. The result is a simplified story that may feel strong, but isn't fully honest. The victim and hero roles offer comfort because they serve the ego. One seeks sympathy, the other seeks validation. Both avoid discomfort by simplifying the situation, but this comes at a cost. These roles limit self-awareness and prevent honest reflection. They create a false sense of clarity by reducing complexity into one-sided narratives. In reality, no one fits neatly into either role. People contribute to problems and participate in solutions. A person who feels hurt might have also caused harm. Life rarely works in absolutes. It helps to notice when your thoughts consistently place you at the center of every event, either as the one who was wronged or the one who saved the day. That pattern can distort how you interpret what's happening around you. But letting go of these extremes doesn't mean letting go of responsibility. It means making room for a more accurate view of the situation. The term for finding non-existent patterns is apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things. In simple terms, it's seeing shapes in clouds and thinking they're significant. A common everyday example is noticing coincidences and constructing a story around them. Imagine you think of a person and they suddenly call you. You might feel it must be fate or telepathy. Or you notice the clock at 11:11 and decide it's a synchronicity message from the universe specifically for you. While these patterns can be fun or feel meaningful, it's important to recognize our mind's bias. We are predisposed to find patterns, even in noise. Conspiracy theories, for instance, often arise from apophenia. People connect random dots of information, seeing intentional plots in what are actually unrelated events. Apophenia is seeing a pattern where one doesn't actually exist. Our brains might do this because missing a real pattern could be dangerous, whereas seeing a false pattern is usually just a false alarm. In evolutionary terms, it was safer to jump away from a rustling bush assuming a predator, even if it was just the wind, than to assume it's nothing and get caught by a tiger. We inherited a slight paranoia bias as a survival mechanism. Better too many false positives than one false negative. However, in modern life, this can lead us to overinterpret and create elaborate stories that aren't true. You might become convinced that random glances from strangers mean everyone is secretly judging you, or a streak of bad luck makes you conclude you're cursed. The key is to maintain healthy skepticism of the patterns your mind thinks it sees. Often, it helps to get an outside perspective. Someone else may look at the same situation and see pure coincidence where you saw a conspiracy. That reality check can snap you out of the spell of apophenia. In short, remember that correlation isn't causation, and not everything means something. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, and a coincidence is just a coincidence. The idea that your thoughts are lying to you is not only a psychological insight, it's a core teaching in many spiritual and esoteric traditions. Across cultures, sages and mystics have pointed out that the reality we perceive is often an illusion crafted by the mind. In the Hermetic philosophy of ancient Egypt and Greece, the very first principle is mentalism. The all is mind, the universe is mental. According to the Hermetic teachings, everything we experience materially is essentially a projection of a universal mind. Reality is like a grand thought in the mind of the all. Thus, the physical world is malleable and not ultimate. It's more like a mental construct or dream. This aligns with the notion that what we see out there is reflective of consciousness. In a sense, Hermeticism was saying over a century ago that the world is a simulation of mind, long before simulation theory became popular. If the universe is mental, then by changing our mind, we can change our experience of reality. In Hinduism and Buddhism, the concept of Maya refers to the illusion of the world. This doesn't mean the world is completely fake, but that the way we normally perceive it is deeply deceptive. As one Hindu text explains, Maya is a power that makes human beings believe what turns out to be an illusion. Everything that we see in the world is part of Maya. We see separation where there is unity. We chase temporary appearances and neglect the eternal spirit. The Buddha taught that the human mind in its unenlightened state generates dukkha, suffering or dissatisfaction, because it is caught in illusions. Spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle notes that in Buddhism, the normal state of mind is considered a form of dukkha-inducing delusion, and Hindu sages like Ramana Maharshi have flatly stated the mind is Maya. The mind itself is the illusion. In other words, if you are completely identified with your mind, you are living in Maya by default. If it all is an illusion, then what's the escape? Eastern traditions say it's through practices like meditation, mindfulness, and yoga, essentially quieting and purifying the mind so that reality can be seen as it truly is. In deep meditation, a practitioner learns to observe thoughts as fleeting clouds rather than absolute truth, which begins to peel back the veil of Maya. The ultimate truth, whether one calls it nirvana, Brahman, or enlightenment, is said to be beyond conceptual thinking. Thus, Buddhist and Hindu wisdom directly advise people to question their thoughts and perceptions, realizing much of what the untrained mind tells us is illusion. Emotional reactions, ego narratives, fears, and cravings. These are seen as unreliable guides to truth, much like cognitive distortions in psychology. Christianity teaches humility and self-examination precisely because our own thoughts and feelings can't always be trusted. One must align with a higher truth rather than one's own understanding. The Quran repeatedly calls the life of this world deceptive. For example, know that the life of this world is no more than play, amusement, luxury, mutual boasting, and competition in wealth and children. Like the rain whose growth pleases the farmers, then it withers. And in the hereafter is severe punishment and forgiveness from Allah. The life of this world is nothing but the delusion of enjoyment. Hearing that you're not real and your thoughts lie to you might feel a bit unsettling, but it's ultimately a message of hope and empowerment. It means that the painful realities constructed by our minds can be changed. We are not stuck with the distortions, we can wake up from them. A big part of breaking cognitive distortions is simply being aware of them and paying attention to how we are framing things to ourselves. The goal is not to never have distorted thoughts or emotions. All humans experience them. The goal is to develop a relationship with your thoughts where you are in charge. You can acknowledge a thought without buying it wholesale. This way, thoughts become suggestions or hypotheses that you can evaluate, rather than edicts you must obey. In closing, the journey out of illusion and into truth is a gradual awakening. Be gentle with yourself in this process. At times, you might peel back one layer of illusion only to find another underneath. That's okay. That's progress. Every step you take to question a lie of the mind is a step toward freedom. As you commit to truth, in your thinking, in your self-view, and in your view of the world, you'll find a new sense of liberation. The world becomes richer and more real when you're no longer seeing it through a fog of false beliefs. You also start to sense a deeper reality, a space of clarity, peace, and authenticity that was always there, just obscured. Ultimately, realizing you are not real in the sense of the false identities and stories can lead you to discover who you really are, and realizing your thoughts often lie opens you up to a higher truth that those thoughts could never fully capture. It's the beginning of an adventure, the true spiritual journey and the true journey of personal growth. Embrace it with curiosity and courage. As you challenge the illusions, you'll reclaim your mind and your life. In doing so, you become more real, more aligned with what is, and more free to shape your destiny with wisdom and love.